Hey everyone! Tonight, I want you to go ahead and do yourself a favor. Dim the lights, find that one spot on the couch that doesn't poke you, and maybe grab a blanket. You're gonna need it, because tonight we're heading somewhere that makes a freezer look like a tropical getaway. We are drifting over to Siberia, specifically to places like Oymyakon and Yakutsk, where the air doesn't just bite, it tries to chew. It's a place where the thermometer essentially gives up, and honestly, can you blame it? Living in negative 71 degrees Celsius isn't really living in the way most of us understand it. It's more of a long-term tactical negotiation with physics. It's the kind of cold that turns a tossed cup of boiling water into a cloud of ice crystals before it hits the ground. It's beautiful in a terrifying, I might lose a toe kind of way. So let's settle in and talk about the people who looked at the most hostile climate on the planet and said, yeah, this seems like a nice spot for a village, because why not? The story of Siberia is, at its heart, a story of people being incredibly stubborn. Take the city of Yakutsk. It's built entirely on permafrost, which is exactly what it sounds like, ground that is permanently frozen. If you try to build a house directly on it, the heat from your living room will melt the ice underneath and your house will slowly sink into a muddy grave. Naturally, the solution wasn't to move somewhere warmer, it was to build the entire city on stilts. So you have these massive concrete apartment blocks standing on legs like a giant depressing game of the floor is lava, except the floor is actually frozen prehistoric swamp. Everything in Yakutsk is a logistical comedy of errors. Take cars, for example. If you turn your engine off in the winter, the oil turns into something resembling grape jelly, and the tires freeze into flat-bottomed squares. If you want to go to the grocery store, you either leave the engine running all day, which is great for the environment, obviously, or you keep it in a heated garage. If you don't have a heated garage, well, your car is now a very expensive lawn ornament until May. It's the ultimate commitment to a commute. Then we have the outdoor markets. They're famous for being the only places on Earth where the fish doesn't need ice. The fish are just stood up in crates like frozen wooden planks. You don't buy a pound of salmon, you buy a structural beam of salmon. The vendors stand out there for 8 hours a day looking like human marshmallows in their layers of fur, just casually chatting while their eyelashes turn into tiny white icicles. It's a vibe, a very, very cold vibe. But let's talk about the biological reality of negative 71 degrees Celsius. When it gets that cold, your breath actually makes a sound. They call it the whispering of the stars. It's the sound of the moisture in your exhaled breath freezing instantly and tinkling as it falls to the ground. It sounds poetic, but it's actually just a reminder that your lungs are currently working overtime to process air that is basically liquid nitrogen's cousin. If you wear glasses, they will freeze to your face. If you aren't careful, the metal frames will peel the skin off your nose when you try to take them off. It's a very clingy climate.
The art of not breaking in the deep freeze. So we've established that the cars are basically useless and the fish are being used as construction materials. But let's talk about the actual humans for a second. In a place like Oymyakon, which holds the record for the coldest inhabited place on Earth, the locals have developed a very specific, very calm brand of stoicism. You kind of have to. If you get worked up and start breathing heavily, you're just inviting more of that crystalline air to frost coat your insides. It's a slow-motion life. When you live in a place where minus 50 degrees Celsius is considered a bit brisk, and the kids only stay home from school if it hits minus 55 degrees Celsius, your perspective on comfort shifts. Imagine being a child in Oymyakon. You're bundled up in so many layers of reindeer fur and wool that you essentially look like a sentient pile of laundry. You waddle to school in the dark, because of course the sun barely checks in during the winter, and you play outside during recess in temperatures that would cause a national emergency in London or New York. It's not that these kids are superhuman, it's just that they don't know any better. To them, a runny nose that freezes into a stalactite before it hits your lip is just a Tuesday. The logistics of the great outdoors. Now, let's address the most glamorous part of Siberian life, the plumbing, or rather, the lack thereof. Because the ground is permafrost, harder than granite and dozens of meters deep, digging pipes for water and sewage is a nightmare. In many of the smaller villages, indoor plumbing is a luxury they simply decided wasn't worth the hassle. This leads to the outhouse experience. Imagine, if you will, waking up in the middle of the night. It is minus 60 degrees Celsius outside. You have to leave your warm bed, put on a coat that weighs 20 pounds, and trek across a yard of crunchy, razor-sharp snow to a wooden shack. There is no heating, there is only a hole and a very, very cold wooden seat. It is perhaps the most efficient bathroom trip you will ever take in your life. There is no scrolling on your phone, there is only the singular goal of finishing before your soul leaves your body. And then there's the water. You don't just turn on a tap. In the winter, many villagers go out to the local river, which is frozen solid, and they harvest ice. They hack out great big cubes of crystal clear river water, haul them home on sleds, and stack them outside their front doors like glass bricks. When you need tea, you go outside, chip off a chunk of the river, and throw it in a pot on the stove. It's organic, it's local, and it's incredibly tedious. But again, in Siberia, tedious is just the default setting for existence. The fashion of survival. If you walked into a high-end fashion boutique in Paris wearing what people wear in Yakutsk, you'd probably be arrested. But in Siberia, fur is the only thing standing between you and a very quiet end. Synthetic materials, the kind we pay hundreds of dollars for at outdoor gear shops, often fail here. They get stiff, they crack, they lose their loft. But reindeer fur is a marvel of evolutionary engineering. Each hair is hollow, trapping a tiny pocket of air for insulation. A pair of unte, traditional boots made from reindeer hide, can keep your toes toasty even when the ground beneath you is literally hundreds of degrees colder than your blood. Of course, looking like a very fashionable grizzly bear has its downsides. You move slowly, you lose all peripheral vision, but hey, at least your ears aren't falling off, so that's a win.
The social cold. You might think that living in such a hostile environment would make people cold and distant, but it's actually the opposite. There is a code of the North. If you see a car pulled over on the side of the Kolyma Highway, often nicknamed the Road of Bones, which is a cheerful bit of branding we'll get to later, you stop. You don't ask if they need help, you just help. Because in a place where an engine failure is a death sentence, helping a stranger isn't just being polite, it's a communal insurance policy. Social life happens in clouds of steam. You meet a friend for a walk, and within 10 minutes, you are both unrecognizable behind masks of hoarfrost. You talk through scarves, your voices muffled and low, discussing the mundane details of life, while the very air around you tries to turn you into a statue. There's a certain dry humor to it. People joke about the Siberian tan, which is just the pale, slightly blue look you get from not seeing the sun for 3 months, or the Siberian workout, which involves trying to start a frozen chainsaw or shoveling snow that is as light as flour but never stops falling. The Road of Bones. We can't talk about Siberia without mentioning the Kolyma Highway. It was built during the Stalin era by Gulag prisoners, and the history is, well, it's dark. It's called the Road of Bones because the men who died building it were often buried right under the roadbed. It was easier than trying to dig graves in the permafrost. So when you drive across this vast white wilderness today, you are literally driving over a monument to human suffering. It's a heavy thought to hold while you're also worrying about your radiator freezing. The road stretches for over 2,000 kilometers through some of the most beautiful and terrifying landscapes on Earth. It's a place of jagged mountains, endless larch forests, and silence so thick you can almost feel it pressing against your ears. In the summer, the road turns into a swampy, mosquito-infested nightmare where trucks sink up to their axles in mud. In the winter, it hardens into a smooth, icy ribbon.
Ironically, the winter is often the best time to travel because the rivers freeze over, creating ice roads that allow you to bypass the treacherous mountain passes. It's nature's way of saying, I'll give you a path, but only if you agree to be refrigerated while you use it. The psychological chill. What does this do to your mind? To live in a world that is monochrome for half the year. Everything is white, gray, or a very deep, bruised purple. The psychological resilience required is immense. There's a specific kind of Siberian cabin fever that sets in, but instead of getting angry, people tend to get very, very quiet. They drink a lot of tea, they read, they wait. There is a strange peace in it, though. When the world is that cold, the chaos of modern life feels very far away. You aren't worried about your social media engagement or your 401k when the primary goal of the day is keep the fire going so the pipes don't explode. It simplifies things. It's a brutal, honest kind of simplicity, but there's a beauty in it if you look closely enough, usually through a triple-paned, frost-covered window.
The sparkle in the deep and the ghosts in the ice. So we've talked about the frozen fish and the car-swallowing mud, but you might be wondering, why? Why would anyone build a city of 300,000 people in a place that clearly doesn't want them there? The answer, as it usually is in history, is because the ground is stuffed full of things that humans find very, very shiny. Welcome to the world of Siberian mining. This region, specifically Yakutia, is responsible for about 25% of the world's diamonds. If you're wearing a diamond ring right now, there's a decent chance it spent the last few 100 million years chilling out under the Siberian permafrost. But getting those diamonds out is a masterclass in human stubbornness. The diamond holes to nowhere. Take the Mir mine. It's a hole so big that it actually creates its own weather patterns. It's nearly 4,000 feet wide, and the air currents flowing into it are so strange that helicopters are forbidden from flying over it because the downward airflow could literally suck them out of the sky. Imagine that, a hole in the ground so aggressive it tries to eat aircraft. In the early days, miners had to use jet engines, yes, jet engines, to thaw the ground enough to even begin digging. They would blast the permafrost with heat, dig a few inches, and then repeat. It was a slow, loud, and incredibly expensive way to find a rock. But when those rocks are diamonds, the Soviet government decided that the cost didn't really matter. This created a weird paradox. Some of the richest ground on Earth is located in the most inhospitable climate. You have cities built on billions of dollars of wealth, yet the people living there still have to worry about their plumbing freezing solid if they sneeze too hard. The mammoth in the room. But diamonds aren't the only thing the permafrost is hiding. Because the ground acts like a giant prehistoric Tupperware container, it has preserved things that should have been gone millions of years ago. Lately, as the world gets a little bit warmer, which to a Siberian means only slightly deadly instead of extremely deadly, the ice is starting to give up its secrets. We're talking about mammoths. Not just bones, but actual mammoths, with hair and skin, and sometimes even their last meal still sitting in their stomachs. There is an entire gray market in Siberia for mammoth ivory. Since selling elephant ivory is rightfully banned, people have turned to mining the tusks of long-dead mammoths. These mammoth hunters head out into the wilderness during the short summer thaw, using high-pressure water hoses to melt away riverbanks. It's a messy, muddy, and mosquito-bitten life, but finding a single high-quality tusk can be a life-changing payday. It's like a frozen gold rush, except you're looking for the teeth of a giant hairy elephant that died when the pyramids were being built. The zombie viruses. Now this is where the story gets a little bit like a sci-fi movie that you'd watch at 2 a.m. Scientists are starting to find things in the thawing ice that aren't quite as charming as a woolly mammoth. They call them Pandora viruses or zombie viruses. These are ancient pathogens that have been locked in the permafrost for 30,000 to 50,000 years. A few years ago, researchers actually woke up one of these viruses in a lab.
Don't worry, it only infects amoebas, not humans, thankfully, because we have enough to deal with. But it proved a point. The permafrost is a biological time capsule. There are concerns that as the ice melts, older versions of things like anthrax or even smallpox could be released from the carcasses of animals or humans buried long ago. In 2016, there was actually an anthrax outbreak in a remote part of Siberia because a heat wave thawed out a reindeer carcass that had been infected 75 years prior. It's a gentle reminder from nature. I've kept this stuff frozen for a reason. Maybe stop poking the freezer. The Soviet science cities. While we're on the topic of weird science, we have to mention the Akademgorodok. In the 1950s, the Soviet Union decided that the best way to foster scientific genius was to stick all their smartest people in the middle of a Siberian forest, far away from the distractions of Moscow. It was a science city. Thousands of physicists, mathematicians, and biologists were moved there. On one hand, it was a dream. They had better food, better housing, and more intellectual freedom than almost anywhere else in the USSR. On the other hand, you're still in Siberia. You're doing nuclear physics while your windows are vibrating from a blizzard that has been screaming for 3 days straight. This is where they conducted the famous silver fox experiment. A scientist named Dmitry Belayev wanted to see if he could recreate the domestication of dogs using wild foxes. Within just a few generations of selective breeding for friendliness, the foxes started to change. Their ears got floppy, their tails started to wag, and they began to bark. They turned into dog foxes. It's one of the most famous biology experiments in history, and it happened in a place where the temperature regularly drops low enough to turn coffee into a weapon. The quiet resilience of the Siberiac. At the end of the day, whether you are a diamond miner, a nuclear physicist, or a mammoth hunter, you become a Siberiac. This isn't just a term for someone who lives in Siberia, it's an identity. It implies a certain toughness, a lack of pretension, and a very dark sense of humor. There's an old Siberian saying, a Siberian is the one who doesn't fear the cold, but the one who dresses warmly. It's a very practical, grounded way of looking at the world. You don't fight the environment, you respect it. You acknowledge that you are a guest in a land that is fundamentally indifferent to your survival. If you go to a dinner party in Yakutsk, the conversation isn't about the latest celebrity gossip. It's about whose garage heater failed, how the ice harvest is going, or the best way to insulate a crawl space with horsehair and mud. It's a life stripped down to its barest essentials. And there's something oddly soothing about that, isn't there? In our world of constant notifications and urgent emails, there is a place where the most urgent thing you can do is make sure the fire doesn't go out. It's a place of deep, heavy silence, a place where the stars don't just twinkle, they whisper.
Frozen delicacies and the cities of silence. So, you've got your reindeer boots on, your house is successfully balanced on its concrete stilts, and you've managed to avoid any prehistoric zombie viruses for the day. Naturally, you're going to be hungry. But in a land where the soil is essentially a giant ice cube, agriculture isn't exactly a thriving industry. You aren't going to find a local farm-to-table salad bar here, unless you consider moss to reindeer a valid culinary pipeline. Tonight, let's talk about what people actually eat when the air is minus 71 degrees Celsius, and then we'll drift over to the places where the people simply left. The gastronomy of the deep freeze. In Siberia, food isn't just fuel, it's internal insulation. If you try to survive on a low-fat, plant-based diet here, you will quite literally freeze from the inside out. You need fat, lots of it. One of the most famous delicacies in Yakutia is something called stroganina. Now, back home, you might have had carpaccio or sashimi, which sounds very elegant and refined. Stroganina is the Siberian cousin that hasn't slept in 3 days and owns a very sharp knife. You take a whole fish, usually a white fish like cheer or omel, that was pulled from a hole in the ice and frozen instantly.
You don't cook it. You don't thaw it. You stand it up on a board and use a plane or a heavy knife to shave off long, curling ribbons of frozen flesh. You dip these frozen curls into a mixture of salt and black pepper and eat them immediately. It's a strange sensation. The fish is so cold it's crunchy, but then it melts on your tongue, releasing a fresh, clean flavor that tastes like the Arctic itself. It's actually incredibly healthy, packed with vitamins that you'd normally get from vegetables, which, let's be honest, are hard to come by when the nearest greenhouse is 3 time zones away. But if you really want to eat like a local, we have to talk about the horse. The Yakut horse is a stout, incredibly hairy beast that looks more like a fluffy ottoman than a stallion. They live outside all year round, digging through the snow to find grass. Because they're so hardy, they are a staple of the diet. And the prize dish? Raw, frozen horse liver. It's sliced thin, just like the fish, and served frozen. To the uninitiated, it sounds intense, but for a Siberiak, it's a powerhouse of energy. It's the kind of food that makes you feel like you could punch a blizzard in the face and win. The ghost cities of the north. As we move away from the dinner table, the landscape starts to change. Siberia is vast, really, truly mind-bogglingly vast, and it is dotted with the skeletons of Soviet ambition. During the 20th century, the USSR built entire cities in the middle of nowhere to support mines or factories. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the funding for these monogorods, one-company towns, dried up almost overnight. Take a place like Kadikchan. Once a thriving coal mining town of over 10,000 people, it is now a silent, crumbling ruin. It wasn't a slow decline, it was an exodus. When the mines closed and the central heating was turned off, which in Siberia is basically a death warrant for a building, people just packed what they could carry and left. Walking through Kadikchan today is like stepping into a Life After People documentary. You'll find apartment blocks with the doors wide open, snow drifting into living rooms, and children's toys still sitting on dusty shelves. In some kitchens, there are still plates on the tables. It's a haunting reminder of how fragile human civilization is when the technological life support of heat and electricity is pulled away. The permafrost is slowly reclaiming the streets, buckling the asphalt, and tilting the buildings at drunken angles. It's peaceful in a tragic, lonely sort of way. The abandoned gulags. Even further off the beaten path, hidden in the taiga, are the remnants of the gulag camps. These are the ghosts of Siberia's darkest era. Because the air is so dry and cold, the wooden watchtowers and barbed wire fences haven't rotted away like they would in a jungle. They just sit there, silvered by the sun and preserved by the frost. There's a strange, heavy silence in these places. You can stand in the middle of a former barracks and hear nothing but the wind whistling through the larch trees. It's a stark contrast to the cozy modern life in Yakutsk. It serves as a grim foundation for the region's history, the realization that for many, Siberia wasn't a choice, it was a sentence. But today's residents have taken that dark history and layered it with a modern, resilient culture that somehow finds joy in a place that was designed to break the spirit. The mystery of the Siberian holes. Before we close our eyes for the night, I have to tell you about the craters. In recent years, giant, mysterious holes have started appearing in the Yamal Peninsula. They look like someone took a giant ice cream scoop to the tundra. Eventually, scientists figured out that these are methane blowouts. As the permafrost thaws, pockets of ancient methane gas build up underground until the pressure becomes too much, and pop, the ground literally explodes, leaving a perfectly circular crater hundreds of feet deep. It's just one more way the Siberian landscape likes to keep people on their toes. One day you're walking across a flat plain, and the next, There's a portal to the center of the earth where your favorite bush used to be. Finding the beauty in the bleak. You might wonder why I find this all so relaxing. There's something about the scale of Siberia that puts things in perspective. When you realize that there are places where the temperature is lower than on the surface of Mars, your own problems, the traffic, the broken microwave, the awkward email you sent, start to feel very small. Siberia is a place that doesn't care about your ego. It doesn't care about your plans. It only cares if you remembered to bring a spare fan belt and a thermos of hot tea. It's a land of extremes that forces you to be present. You can't daydream when you're walking on ice. You have to watch every step. You can't be fake. The cold strips away everything but the essential. So, as you drift off, imagine you're in a small, well-heated cabin in the middle of the Yakutian wilderness. Outside, the wind is howling, and the temperature is plummeting toward -70 degrees Celsius. But inside, the fire is crackling, the tea is hot, and you are perfectly, utterly safe. The world outside is frozen in time, but you are warm.